Welcome back to the program. Joining me live in the studio is the Assistant Defence Minister, Peter Khalil. Thanks for your time. It looks like compromise done and this legislation will go through on the hate crimes.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. And it is pleasing to see that the Parliament's able to pass these laws. Really important. We had a very emotional day of condolence motion yesterday where pretty much every member of Parliament spoke. But now the political action that's necessary to pass these laws is looking like it's going to happen. It's not as much as we would have wanted and as strong as we would have wanted to be, but obviously decisions were made by the Coalition and the Greens to reject aspects that we think should be in the bills, and so does the Jewish community, frankly. But once we get these through, that's something that I think we can point to the fact that Parliament's done its job.
Would you like to go back to the vilification laws? Because it was shelved in this process, but a number of your colleagues have said they want to go back to it.
Yeah, look, it was removed, and there is form here by the Liberal Party and the opposition. I mean, they had attempted to remove the racial discrimination, anti-vilification provisions in the Racial Discrimination Act. Even though this was something that was recommended by Gillian Siegel, the anti-Semitism envoy, around anti-vilification provisions, they claim to support her report, but at the same time say, no, we're not going to support the
Do you want to go back to it?
Well, look, this is something that the members of Parliament have been articulating, the fact that there is a need for stronger provisions around anti-vilification. It is a contested space, as you know. There was a lot of debate around 18C in the Racial Discrimination Act. I have my own views on this. I think there is a balance to be had around ensuring that people can't just openly vilify others based on their attributes. And then there's a balance with free speech. So this is a debate that we have to have, and I think we sort of started to have it here, and then it was the measures were removed because it wasn't going to be supported by the Coalition.
Given the atrocity of December 14, though, the number one priority this week, obviously, and should be, the protection of our Jewish community.
That's right. Yeah.
Beyond anything else.
I mean, look, the horror of what we saw on the 14th of December. The aching grief that we have for the Jewish Australian community, but also the loss of that innocent life is also a loss, and I said in my condolence remarks, it's a loss of our innocence as well as a nation, and there's grief across the nation around this. And fundamentally, I've made the argument that these groups, these individuals and groups who have this the radical Islamist worldview, it's a perversion of a faith, it's a perversion that actually leads to people in a totalitarian sense, and the same with the neo-Nazis, a view that they can dehumanise and demonise minorities, and in this case the Jewish community, to the extent that they can then justify violent attacks and the killing of innocent life. That totalitarian view of the world, or a worldview, if you like, an ideology, is something utterly to be rejected because it is antithetical to our democracy, Kieran.
And it needs
and
to
we
be,
are fighting
it needs
for
to be
our...
called out directly, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and there are laws. So I've said this as well. We can pass laws in this place to address some of these issues, as we should, and we are doing that today in the Australian Parliament. But everyone in the society kind of has an obligation, whether it's the media, the political class, the corporate sector, individual citizens, because we actually commit to a society in which we can disagree peacefully without resorting to violence. That's a commitment that the majority of Australians make because they believe in the multi-faith
Did we drop the ball, though, as a nation? I spoke in recent years. I spoke to Mike Pizzullo yesterday, and he says he's not so concerned about the next phase of legislation, but the need to be determined and vigilant in enforcing the laws as they stand now to make sure that security agencies and everyone else is on the front foot when it comes to the threat of Islamic extremist terrorism.
Yeah, look, I'll say about that, having been the chair of the Intelligence Committee, having had some experience with the intelligence agencies, they have, and the law enforcement and security agencies, they've done terrific work. I mean, there's many planned attacks that have been foiled and disrupted and so on. So they do terrific work. We give them the resources they need to do that work, and we're always looking at that to make sure we support
So
them.
You don't think there's been a level of complacency?
I don't think... I think there has been a terrible increase in anti-Semitism clearly over the last 2 years. It's always been this horrific evil that has been there for hundreds of years, generations, and it's certainly increased in the last couple of years. But the hate that we've seen and the increase that we've seen and the actions of individuals and groups that seek to act out on that hate has increased as well. And that is the concerning thing. Now, we always need to do more work with the communities to actually help protect them. The government has done a lot of things around security. I'd like to see a day where you don't have to be spending $30 million for security for synagogues and childcare centres and schools. That shouldn't be the country that we live in. Unfortunately, at the moment, there is this level of hatred, there's a level of anti-Semitism, which is a scourge, and it's been a long...
Should we, and should your government have been more stronger in terms of the way you responded in the immediately after October 7, October 9, when we saw the shocking protests on the steps of the Opera House? Where are the Jews?
I think
those sorts of statements that were made were appalling.
I can speak for myself. I think we all have responsibility and all have an obligation to do better and to be better. I know that there were important things put in place, Operation Avalite, the funding and resources for security for Jewish communities. I remember, having those conversations with members of the executive very early on the 8th of October about the need to protect synagogues and other places of worship because, unfortunately from experience, I've seen how this type of terrorism works. And we did do those things. I think there is a broader set of societal challenges that we have as a nation. What kind of country do we want to live in? A commitment that I was saying earlier that Australians have to a type of society in which we can disagree with each other without resorting to violence, where we're not dehumanising or demonising a minority and attacking them on that basis. And that's something that is broader than just government.
I think Julian and Lisa articulated it really effectively yesterday. You've got the extremist, the neo-Nazis, you've got the Islamic extremists, terrorists as well, and those that would want to seek to do people harm. But then you've also got elements like the higher education sector, cultural groups and so on, that have had huge elements of anti-Semitism throughout. And that has its own terrible, perverse effect.
I think you see why the Prime Minister and Jason Clare, the Education Minister, in their announcements back on the 18th of December, talked about the need to have education and training in the university sector and also in schools and curriculums around Holocaust, the history of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And I think that education is a key element of this. People's understanding of what this is and the history of it is really important because it pushes back against ignorance, and ignorance is a driver of hatred as well.
And you see the euphemism of Zionists being used by various writers and elements within the culture, the cultural sector, for want of a better phrase. But the idea that Zionists should not be culturally safe, that is a euphemism for saying Jews shouldn't be safe. Well, because nearly every Jew is a Zionist, and most Australians would be if you believe Israel should exist.
Well, if you believe in a two-state solution, one can make that broad definition as well. You're right about that. I think all of us, I'm not sure about you, but I certainly believe in peace in the Middle East, and I believe in Israel living side by side with the Palestinian state in peace and security. And I think the majority of Australians would think that is a reasonable place to be. I think the balance that I was talking about earlier between free speech and vilification is a really important one. Governments always grapple with this, whether it's any level of government, and getting the legislation right is really important. So you're not impinging upon Kieran Gilbert's right to speak his mind, but at the same time, Kieran Gilbert shouldn't be permitted to articulate or vilify someone and to incite hatred towards that person because of their ethnicity or their background.
And held accountable for, say, the flaws of a foreign government, for example, is an example of that. I want to ask you as well about the extraordinary situation we're seeing in relation to Greenland.
Yes.
I know it's a very different issue, but I do want to get your thoughts on it because Europe's responding very strongly. They're concerned about this as where it's heading. Is this a threat to NATO?
It's a good question, and I think the other issue here is around the importance of international law, sovereignty. All of these issues are part of this discussion. I was saying to you earlier, I get a lot of my knowledge around Greenland from the Danish political drama Borgen, which uncannily is kind of almost, art imitating life, or life is now imitating art in some respects. There is an indigenous population of Greenland. There's always been this tension about their independence from Denmark, which obviously acquired Greenland, I think it was over 100 years ago. So it's a complicated thing. When it comes to NATO, this is a really interesting point. I mean, obviously the first Trump administration was also had some tension points with NATO that has righted itself with Stoltenberg and Trump's relationship. I think that's been a positive. But Europe is pushing back on this. I hope that there can be some sort of negotiated settlement, that this doesn't get out of hand. And the Australian government has always been very clear about upholding international law and international norms. Benefits us as a middle power that everyone abides by.
It's a tricky one to balance, though, when you've got our biggest security partner, our alliance, and then you're repeating this mantra, the government, that it's an issue for Denmark and Greenland to manage.
Well, it certainly is an issue for Denmark and Greenland to manage, and it's an issue for the people of Greenland as well about what their wishes are, and the Danish government's engagement with the Trump administration and the US government. I mean, again, we would support a negotiated settlement of this and not see it spiral out of control is our interest.
Peter Khalil, Assistant Defence Minister, thanks for your time as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The Country Fire Authority's annual report has been handed down in Victoria following weeks of criticism over the state for funding of the organisation. I want to bring in Georgie Dickerson. Take us through the key elements of this.
Yeah, well, the funding of government grants for the CFA has increased by $21.8 million this last financial year. This is the first increase that the CFA has seen in government grants since 2021. We'll break down some of those figures for you now. So for this financial year, $477 million was the total income. This was made up of $361 million worth of grants. Last year, $451 million. And let's compare this to 2020 to 2021, $456 million.